If you think betrayal only comes from strangers, think again. Sometimes, the people who smile at your dinner table are the very ones planning to take everything you have. My name is Emma Carter, and this is the story of how my parents secretly sold my grandmother's house behind her back, believing she would never find out. What they didn't know was that Grandma had seen it coming months earlier, and she'd already made a move that would change all of our lives forever. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you couldn't imagine them hurting you? My grandmother did. And that trust nearly cost her everything. My grandmother, Margaret Carter, was 78 years old. She wasn't rich by celebrity standards, but she owned something far more valuable, a beautiful two-story farmhouse that had been in our family for over 60 years. It wasn't just a house. It held memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, family reunions, and the final moments of my grandfather's life. Grandma often said, "A house is made of wood and bricks. A home is built with love." Unfortunately, not everyone in our family believed that. My father, Daniel, was drowning in debt after several failed business investments. My mother, Susan, always dreamed of living in a luxury neighborhood surrounded by expensive cars and designer homes. Together, they convinced themselves that Grandma's house was the solution to all of their problems. They never said it directly in front of Grandma. Instead, they whispered behind closed doors. "Once we sell that old place, we'll finally be free," my mother said one evening. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. My father sighed. "She'll never agree. Then we make her agree." Those words stayed in my mind for weeks. At first, I thought they were only frustrated. Families argue about money all the time. I wanted to believe they would never actually betray Grandma. I was wrong. Grandma noticed small changes long before anyone else did. Suddenly, my parents visited her every weekend. They brought flowers. They cooked dinner. They offered to organize her paperwork. To everyone else, it looked like they had become caring children. But Grandma had lived long enough to understand that people rarely change overnight. One afternoon, while drinking tea on her porch, she smiled at me. "Emma," she said softly, "when people suddenly become too kind, always ask yourself what they're hoping to gain." I laughed. "You're overthinking it, Grandma." She smiled but didn't answer. Looking back now, I wish I had listened. Over the next month, my parents became even more involved in Grandma's finances. They insisted on helping with bills. They asked where important documents were kept. They even offered to drive her to meetings with her lawyer. Every excuse sounded reasonable. Every action looked innocent. But Grandma quietly started paying attention. One morning, she noticed that several folders inside her home office had been moved. Nothing was missing. But someone had definitely searched through them. She didn't accuse anyone. Instead, she simply placed everything back exactly where it belonged. Then she waited. A few days later, she visited her longtime attorney without telling anyone. She carried a small folder under her arm. Inside were property papers, old family records, and a handwritten letter my grandfather had written before he passed away. Her attorney looked concerned. "Margaret, is something wrong?" She smiled politely. "I just want to make sure everything is exactly as it should be." The attorney reviewed every document carefully. When he finished, he looked surprised. "Your property is still fully protected. No one can legally sell it without your direct approval." Grandma nodded. "Good." Then she leaned forward. "But I have a feeling someone is going to try." The attorney didn't laugh. He had worked with Grandma for over 30 years. He trusted her instincts. Together, they quietly prepared several legal documents, just in case. No one else knew. Not my parents. Not even me. Meanwhile, my father became increasingly impatient. Bills kept arriving. Collectors kept calling. One night, I overheard another argument. "We can't wait forever," my mother whispered angrily. She still controls everything. There has to be another way, Dad replied. Neither of them realized I was standing outside the kitchen door. For the first time, fear settled in my chest. What exactly were they planning? The next weekend, Grandma invited the entire family for Sunday dinner. She cooked everyone's favorite meals. She laughed. She shared old stories. Everything felt completely normal. But now I remember one strange moment. Grandma looked around the dinner table for several seconds before raising her glass. Family, she said, is built on honesty. My parents smiled awkwardly. Grandma continued. Without honesty, even the strongest family eventually falls apart. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. No one understood what she truly meant. Except Grandma. She already knew a storm was coming. And while everyone else believed she was simply an old woman living alone, she was quietly preparing for the biggest battle of her life. What none of us knew was that, within just a few weeks, someone would forge documents, a buyer would appear, and my parents would believe they had finally won. But Grandma had one secret they could never have imagined. And when that secret came to light, everything they had planned would collapse before their eyes. The weeks after that family dinner felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Grandma went back to her normal routine. Every morning she watered the flowers on her front porch, fed the birds in the backyard, and waved to the neighbors as they walked their dogs. If anyone had looked at her, they would have thought nothing had changed. But beneath her calm smile, she was watching everything. One afternoon, I stopped by to bring her groceries. As I unpacked the bags, she suddenly asked, Emma, do you believe people always show their true intentions? I shrugged. Eventually, I guess. She smiled. They do. The hard part is having enough patience to let them. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. A few days later, my father unexpectedly offered to drive Grandma to her doctor's appointment. Normally she preferred going alone. But this time, she accepted. The appointment lasted less than an hour. On the drive home, my father casually brought up the house. You know, Mom, this place is getting harder for you to maintain. Grandma looked out the window. I've managed it for decades. I know, but maybe it's time to think about something smaller. She didn't answer. Dad continued. There are beautiful retirement communities nearby. You'd have neighbors, activities, medical care. Grandma slowly turned toward him. And what would happen to this house? Dad forced a smile. We'd help you sell it. She nodded once. I'll think about it. That single sentence made my father believe his plan was finally working. When he got home, he excitedly told my mother. She's considering it. Susan smiled for the first time in weeks. I told you she'd come around. Neither of them realized Grandma had no intention of selling anything. She simply wanted to see how far they were willing to go. The following Friday, something unusual happened. A black luxury SUV pulled into Grandma's driveway. A well-dressed man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Richard Lawson. I'm a real estate investor. Grandma raised an eyebrow. I don't remember inviting one. Richard looked confused. I was told the family wanted to discuss selling the property. Grandma remained perfectly calm. I think you've been misinformed. The man apologized repeatedly before leaving. As his vehicle disappeared down the road, Grandma quietly wrote down the license plate number in a small notebook. She didn't chase him. She didn't call my parents. She simply added another piece to the puzzle. That evening, my father received a phone call. His face turned pale. What do you mean she refused to meet him? My mother immediately knew something had gone wrong. The investor? Dad nodded. She acted like she knew nothing about it. Susan slammed her hand on the table. This wasn't supposed to happen. I walked into the kitchen just as the conversation stopped. Both of them smiled nervously. Dad quickly changed the subject. How was work today? It was obvious they were hiding something. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Richard Lawson. Why would a real estate investor visit Grandma if she had never agreed to sell? The next morning, I drove back to her house. She was sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee already waiting. I knew you'd come, she said. You knew? You've always been curious. I hesitated before asking the question. Grandma, did someone really send a buyer here? She looked directly into my eyes. Yes. Who? I think you already know. I didn't want to say it. My parents? She remained silent. That silence answered everything. Tears filled my eyes. No, they wouldn't. Grandma gently held my hand. Emma, love doesn't disappear just because people make terrible choices. But why would they do this? Desperation makes people believe they're entitled to things that don't belong to them. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally she stood up. Come with me. She led me upstairs into Grandpa's old study. Most of the room hadn't changed in years. The same wooden desk. The same old books. The same family photographs. She unlocked a small cabinet hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside was a thick folder marked only with one word. Protection. My heart started racing. What is this? She smiled. My insurance. Before she could explain further, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She answered calmly. Hello. A man's voice spoke loudly enough that I could hear pieces of the conversation. Mrs. Carter, this is regarding the property sale. Grandma interrupted immediately. There is no property sale. A pause. I'm sorry, we were informed your family already approved everything. Grandma's expression changed. Who informed you? Another long silence. I understand, she replied quietly. Thank you for calling. She hung up. For the first time, I saw genuine disappointment in her eyes. Not because someone wanted the house. Because the betrayal had become real. She slowly closed the folder. It has begun. What has? The part where they stop asking for permission. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly realized this wasn't just about convincing Grandma anymore. Someone was already acting as if they owned the house. And if that was true, the next step would be far more dangerous than either of us had imagined. Little did we know, within days, forged paperwork would appear, and my parents would believe they had finally found a way to take everything. After that phone call, everything changed. Grandma didn't panic. She didn't cry. She simply looked at me with the calm expression she'd worn her entire life. Emma, she said quietly, when someone believes they've already won, they become careless. I wanted to believe she was right. But deep inside, I was terrified. If someone was pretending to sell her house without her permission, this wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was something much more serious. The following Monday, my father came to visit Grandma alone. He arrived carrying a box of pastries and wearing his friendliest smile. I thought we could spend some time together, he said. Grandma welcomed him inside. They drank coffee in the kitchen while I stayed in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. After a few minutes, Dad casually brought up the house again. Mom, have you thought about what we discussed? Grandma stirred her tea. I've thought about many things. I really believe selling would make life easier. For whom? She asked. Dad hesitated. For everyone. Grandma smiled politely. I see. He reached into his briefcase and placed a stack of papers on the table. I spoke with an advisor. These are just preliminary documents. Nothing final. Grandma didn't even touch them. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. Daniel, if I ever decide to sell my home, I'll contact my own attorney. Dad quickly laughed. Of course. I was only trying to help. He packed the papers away and left 20 minutes later. As soon as his car disappeared, Grandma turned to me. He wasn't expecting me to refuse. How can you tell? Because he brought paperwork before I asked for it. That evening, Grandma called her attorney. She explained exactly what had happened. His response was immediate. I think it's time we check the county property records. The next morning, they did. Everything still appeared normal. Grandma remained the legal owner. For a brief moment, we all felt relieved. Maybe we had worried for nothing. But that relief didn't last long. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived in Grandma's mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a property transfer document. At the bottom, someone had signed Grandma's name. Only, it wasn't her signature. It was a poor imitation. The moment I saw it, my hands started shaking. Grandma. She looked at the paper for several seconds. Then she quietly whispered. So, they actually did it. There was no anger in her voice. Only sadness. Not because of the document. Because someone in her own family had crossed a line that could never be erased. Her attorney arrived within an hour. He carefully examined every page. This signature is fake, he said firmly. Without question. Grandma nodded. I know. But whoever created this believed it would be enough to fool someone. He immediately placed the papers into a folder. We're documenting everything. As he prepared to leave, he looked at Grandma. I'm glad you followed my advice months ago. I frowned. What advice? Grandma smiled gently. I'll explain soon. The mystery only grew deeper. What had they done months ago? Why wasn't Grandma surprised? That weekend, my parents acted as though nothing had happened. They invited me over for dinner. Throughout the evening, they laughed, joked, and talked about future vacation plans. Then my mother suddenly smiled. Your grandmother seems happier lately. I looked at her carefully. She does. Mom nodded. Maybe she's finally ready for a new chapter. I knew exactly what she meant. But I said nothing. For the first time in my life, I realized my parents were hiding something from everyone, including me. Later that night, as I was leaving, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Dad sounded nervous. What if she finds out? Susan answered confidently. By the time she does, it'll be too late. Those words echoed in my mind all the way home. The next morning, I rushed to Grandma's house. She was already waiting on the porch. Without saying a word, she handed me another folder. Inside were certified copies of legal documents dated nearly 6 months earlier. I looked up, confused. What are these? Grandma smiled. My backup plan. Before she could explain further, a black sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. 2 professionally dressed people stepped out carrying briefcases. One of them introduced himself. Mrs. Margaret Carter. Yes. We're here regarding the scheduled property inspection. Grandma folded her arms. I didn't schedule one. The man looked confused. Our office was informed the property had already been sold. Silence filled the driveway. Grandma looked at me. Then back at the visitors. Finally, she said one sentence that made everyone freeze. I'm afraid whoever told you that has just made the biggest mistake of their life. The 2 representatives stood silently in the driveway, exchanging confused looks. I'm sorry, one of them said. Our office received documents stating that this property had already been transferred to a new owner. We were sent here to complete the inspection before closing. Grandma remained perfectly calm. I'm afraid you've been misled. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Would you mind taking a look at these? Grandma accepted the papers and slowly flipped through each page. I watched her face carefully, expecting anger or panic. Instead, she smiled. A small, knowing smile. The representative frowned. Is something wrong? Grandma looked up. Actually, you've just confirmed exactly what I expected. Both men looked completely confused. What do you mean? She carefully returned the documents. These papers contain forged signatures. The younger representative's face turned pale. Forged? Yes. He immediately called his office while standing in the driveway. After several minutes, he ended the call. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Grandma shook her head. No. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fraud. Neither representative argued. They apologized repeatedly before leaving. As the sedan disappeared down the road, I turned toward Grandma. How are you so calm? She looked at me with gentle eyes. Because I prepared for this months ago. She invited me inside. We sat in Grandpa's old study once again. This time, she unlocked the cabinet marked protection and placed several sealed envelopes on the desk. I never wanted to believe my own children would betray me, she admitted. But I also refused to ignore the warning signs. She opened the first envelope. Inside were certified legal papers. My attorney suggested that if I ever suspected someone might try to steal the house, I should create a legal safety net. What kind of safety net? I asked. Grandma smiled. I transferred the house into a protected family trust 6 months ago. I blinked. A trust? She nodded. The house is still mine for as long as I live. But it can no longer be sold through ordinary paperwork. I stared at her in disbelief. So, even if someone forged your signature, the sale would never be legal, she finished. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. They never knew. Grandma slowly shook her head. I didn't tell anyone except my attorney. At that exact moment, her phone rang. It was her lawyer. I've just received some important information, he said. Our investigation found that someone has already been showing your property to potential buyers. My stomach dropped. What? Grandma remained calm. Do we know who? Not yet, the attorney replied. But we're getting closer. After hanging up, Grandma looked out the window toward the old oak tree Grandpa had planted decades earlier. He loved that tree, she whispered. He always said strong roots survive every storm. I could hear the emotion in her voice. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about protecting the memories she and Grandpa had built together. That evening, I drove home with a heavy heart. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed something unusual. Dad was standing outside, talking to a man I had never seen before. The stranger handed him a thick envelope. Dad quickly looked around before slipping it inside his jacket. The moment he noticed me, the conversation ended. The stranger walked away without saying a word. Dad forced a smile. Emma, you're home early. Who's that? Oh, just someone from work. He answered too quickly. Too smoothly. For the first time in my life, I knew my father was lying to my face. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. What was inside it? Money? Contracts? More forged documents? I didn't have any answers. But I knew one thing. Whatever my parents were planning, they believed they were only days away from owning Grandma's house. What they didn't realize was that every step they took was leading them straight into the trap Grandma had quietly prepared months before. And the next person to enter the story would uncover a secret so shocking that it would change the entire case forever. The evening continued as if nothing had changed. I quietly helped serve drinks, greeted relatives, and stayed out of everyone's conversations. From across the room, I could hear my father proudly talking about Daniel. My eldest son has done everything right, he said with a smile. One day, he'll take over everything I've built. The guests applauded. Daniel stood beside him, accepting the compliments as if the future had already been written. Then my father looked in my direction. And Ethan? He paused for a moment. I still hope he'll eventually find a real job. The room erupted with uncomfortable laughter. A few relatives looked away. Others shook their heads with sympathy. I simply smiled and continued placing glasses on the table. My mother quietly walked over to me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You deserve better than this." I gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mom." For the first time in years. I truly meant those words. Because I wasn't there to seek anyone's approval. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my assistant. "Mr. Carter, the board members have arrived at the hotel. They're waiting for your confirmation before signing the final agreement." I typed a quick reply. "Please give me another hour." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. No one around me had any idea that a multi-million-dollar business deal was waiting for my signature. To them, I was still the family disappointment. As dinner came to an end, my father stood up and tapped his glass. The room became silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. "This birthday is special because I also have an important family announcement." He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Starting next month, Daniel will officially become the future leader of our family business." Everyone clapped loudly. Then my father smiled proudly and added, "The Carter legacy is finally in safe hands." The applause grew even louder. I joined in with a polite clap. Then something unexpected happened. One of the guests near the entrance suddenly stood up. He looked around the room. Then his eyes stopped on me. A smile spread across his face. Without saying a word, he began walking directly toward me. And the entire room fell silent. The room became so quiet that you could hear the soft music playing in the background. Every guest turned toward the man walking through the crowd. He was wearing a tailored navy blue suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone who was used to making important decisions. No one in my family recognized him. But I did. His name was Richard Hayes. He was the chairman of one of the largest investment firms our company had ever worked with. Just 2 days earlier, we had spent 6 hours negotiating our biggest partnership. Richard walked straight toward me. Then, in front of everyone, he smiled and extended his hand. "Mr. Carter," he said warmly. "I've been trying to reach you all evening." I shook his hand. "It's good to see you again, Richard." The expressions around the room changed instantly. My father frowned. Daniel looked completely confused. One of my uncles whispered, "How does Ethan know someone like him?" Richard laughed. "I hope I'm not interrupting the celebration." I smiled. "Not at all." Then Richard looked around the room. "I just wanted to personally congratulate you. Our board has unanimously approved the partnership. Once you sign the agreement tonight, your company will officially begin its largest international expansion." The silence became even heavier. Several relatives stared at me as if they had heard the wrong name. My father cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I think you've mistaken my son for someone else." Richard looked surprised. "Mistaken?" He smiled politely. "No, sir. This is Ethan Carter, the founder and chief executive officer of Carter Digital Solutions. Our company has been looking forward to working with him for months." No one said a single word. My father slowly turned toward me. His face had gone completely pale. "The CEO?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes, Dad. I started the company 6 years ago. I just never felt the need to talk about it." Gasps echoed across the room. The same relatives who had laughed at me only minutes earlier were now staring in complete disbelief. Daniel looked speechless. My father opened his mouth to say something. But for the first time in my entire life, he couldn't find a single word. The silence in the room lasted for what felt like an eternity. No one moved. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me. My father looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "You started a company?" he asked quietly. "6 years ago," I replied. "And today, it employs more than 200 people across 3 countries." A wave of whispers spread through the room. 200 employees. 3 countries. Is this really Ethan? Richard smiled proudly. That's actually an old number. He turned toward the guests. The company has grown much faster than anyone expected. Their technology is now used by businesses around the world. One of my uncles couldn't hide his curiosity. "If that's true, why didn't you ever tell us?" I took a deep breath before answering. Because every time I tried to share a dream, I was told it would never work. So I stopped talking. I decided that one day, my results would speak louder than my words. The room became silent once again. Even Daniel lowered his head. For years, he had accepted every compliment while I quietly accepted every insult. My mother wiped away tears. "I always knew you were working hard," she whispered. "I just never imagined it was something this incredible." I smiled gently. "Thank you, Mom." Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small black folder on the dining table. Inside were photographs of our offices, newspaper interviews, business awards, and letters of appreciation from clients around the world. One by one, the relatives picked them up. Their expressions changed from curiosity to disbelief, and finally, to respect. The same people who had ignored me for years were now asking questions about my company, my journey, and my future plans. But I wasn't interested in proving that I was successful. I wanted them to understand something much more important. A person's value should never be measured by someone else's opinion. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is carrying the biggest dream. And sometimes, the one everyone calls a failure is simply writing a success story that no one has read yet. Friday was only 2 days away. The meeting with the attorney had been scheduled. Every important witness had agreed to appear. The evidence was organized. For the first time, it seemed like the truth was finally about to come out. But Grandma wasn't celebrating. She sat quietly in her favorite chair by the living room window, staring at the old oak tree in the backyard. "Something's wrong," she said softly. I looked at her. What do you mean? She folded her hands. When people know they've lost, they often make one last desperate move. I wished she was wrong. Unfortunately, she wasn't. That evening, Grandma's attorney called in a hurry. Margaret, I need you to check the study immediately. Grandma looked confused. Why? We've received information that someone may try to remove or destroy documents before Friday. Without wasting another second, we hurried upstairs. The study looked perfectly normal. The desk was untouched. The bookshelf hadn't moved. The cabinet labeled "Protection" was still locked. Grandma unlocked it carefully. Everything inside appeared to be in place. Then she paused. Wait. She picked up one of the folders. It isn't sitting the way I left it. I frowned. You can really tell. She smiled faintly. When you've kept papers in the same cabinet for 20 years, you notice even the smallest change. We checked every document one by one. Nothing was missing. But something had definitely happened. Someone had opened the cabinet. The attorney arrived less than an hour later. After inspecting the room, he pointed toward the lock. There are tiny scratch marks. Grandma leaned closer. I never noticed those before. They're fresh, he replied. It looks like someone tried to unlock it without a key. A chill ran down my spine. So someone actually came into the house. The attorney nodded. And they were looking for evidence. Grandma remained calm. They were too late. She reached into another drawer and removed a small sealed envelope. I moved the original documents weeks ago. I stared at her. The originals aren't in the cabinet? She smiled. No. The cabinet only contains certified copies. I couldn't help laughing in relief. They searched the wrong place. Grandma nodded. They walked into exactly the trap I expected. The attorney smiled for the first time in weeks. Margaret, you've been 3 steps ahead this entire time. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Mr. Harris, the neighbor, knocked on Grandma's front door. I thought you should see this. He handed us another flash drive. My security cameras recorded someone again. We immediately played the footage. A dark SUV stopped outside the house shortly after midnight. This time, the video was much clearer. A person walked toward the front porch wearing a baseball cap and gloves. They spent several minutes trying to unlock the front door before quickly leaving. Although the face was still partially hidden. One detail stood out. The same silver watch. The very watch Grandma had given my father years earlier. Silence filled the room. Grandma slowly sat down. Tears formed in her eyes, not because she was afraid, but because the truth was becoming impossible to deny. I never imagined my own son would come to my home like a thief, she whispered. I wrapped my arms around her. We're going to get through this. She nodded. Yes. But after this, our family will never be the same. Later that afternoon, the attorney added the new footage to the growing evidence file. He closed the folder with a satisfied smile. I believe we have everything we need. As we prepared to leave his office, his phone rang. He answered, listened for a few moments, then looked directly at Grandma. They've confirmed the meeting. Everyone will be there. The buyers. The witnesses. Your son and daughter-in-law. And one more person. Grandma frowned. Who? The attorney smiled. The anonymous whistleblower. My heart nearly stopped. After weeks of secrets. The one person who knew exactly how the fraud had happened was finally ready to speak. None of us knew what they were about to reveal. But one thing was certain. By the end of tomorrow's meeting, every lie would be exposed, every secret would come to light, and my parents would have no place left to hide. Friday morning arrived with an unusual silence. No one spoke much during the drive to the attorney's office. Grandma sat beside the window, calmly watching the streets pass by. She looked peaceful, but I knew she was carrying a heavy heart. No mother ever imagines she will have to face her own son over something like this. When we arrived, several people were already waiting in the conference room. The attorney greeted us warmly. "The buyers are here. The witnesses have arrived. And your son and daughter-in-law are on their way." A few minutes later, the door opened. My parents walked in together. Dad tried to smile. Mom looked confident, almost as if she believed this meeting would simply clear up a misunderstanding. Then they noticed everyone else in the room. The real estate representatives. The office employee who had agreed to testify. The private investigator. And finally, a woman quietly entered through the back door. She wore a dark blue jacket and carried a small folder in her hands. The attorney stood. "Thank you for coming." He turned toward the room. "I'd like everyone to meet the anonymous whistleblower." The woman slowly removed her sunglasses. "My name is Linda Brooks." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I worked as an assistant at the real estate office." My parents immediately looked at one another. Dad's face lost its color. Mom lowered her eyes. Linda opened her folder. "I've kept these documents for months because I couldn't live with what happened." She placed several original files on the table. "I was told the homeowner had approved the sale. But when I compared the signatures..." She paused. "I realized they didn't match." The attorney asked quietly. "What happened next?" Linda swallowed hard. "I reported it to my supervisor. And he told me to stop asking questions." The room became completely silent. She continued. "A few days later, I overheard a conversation." "What did you hear?" Linda looked directly at my parents. "I heard Mr. Carter say." She hesitated before repeating the words. "She'll never know until the house is already gone." Grandma slowly closed her eyes. Dad suddenly stood up. "That's not true." The attorney calmly replied. "Please sit down. You'll have an opportunity to respond." Dad remained standing. "She's lying." Before anyone could answer, the investigator connected a laptop to the large screen. The security footage from Mr. Harris's cameras began to play. The dark SUV. The person approaching Grandma's mailbox. The silver watch. Then the second video. The attempted break-in. Again. The same watch. The same jacket. The room fell silent. Dad slowly sat back down. His hands were shaking. The attorney then displayed copies of the forged documents beside authentic samples of Grandma's signature. Even to an untrained eye, the difference was obvious. "There is no reasonable doubt," the attorney said. "These signatures were forged." Mom finally spoke. "We never wanted to hurt her." Grandma looked at her with tears in her eyes. "Then why didn't you simply ask me?" Susan couldn't answer. Instead, she quietly looked down at the table. For several long seconds, no one said a word. Then Grandma reached into her purse and placed one final document on the table. "This," she said softly, "is the trust agreement I signed 6 months before any of this began." The attorney smiled. As of that date, the property could not legally be sold without the trust's approval. The buyers looked stunned. "So, the sale was never valid?" "Correct," the attorney replied. "It never had any legal effect. Everything my parents had planned. Every meeting. Every forged paper. Every secret conversation. Had been completely useless from the very beginning." Dad buried his face in his hands. "I've ruined everything." Grandma looked at him with sadness rather than anger. "No, Daniel. You ruined it the day you chose greed over family." Her words filled the room with silence. The meeting wasn't over yet. there was still one final decision to be made. And Grandma was about to reveal exactly what she intended to do next, a choice that would surprise everyone in the room. No one spoke for several moments after Grandma's final words. The room felt heavy. My father sat with his head down, unable to look anyone in the eye. My mother quietly wiped away tears, but no one knew whether they came from guilt, or from realizing their plan had completely fallen apart. Grandma slowly stood up. At 78 years old, she looked stronger than anyone else in the room. Not because she had won, but because she had never stopped standing for what was right. The attorney looked at her. Mrs. Carter, the decision is yours. You have enough evidence to pursue this case to the fullest extent. Everyone turned toward Grandma. She took a deep breath before speaking. I've spent my entire life teaching my family that honesty matters more than money. She paused, her voice steady. It breaks my heart that my own son forgot that lesson. Dad finally looked up. Tears filled his eyes. Mom. I'm so sorry. Grandma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to him. For a moment, it looked as though she might hug him. Instead, she gently placed her hand on his shoulder. An apology doesn't erase betrayal. Dad lowered his head again. I know. I was desperate. Grandma nodded. I believe you. But desperation is never an excuse to steal from someone who loves you. The room remained silent. Then my mother stood. I'm responsible too. She looked directly at Grandma. I pushed Daniel. I kept telling him that selling the house would solve everything. She began crying openly. I thought once we had the money, we'd finally be happy. Grandma looked at her kindly. And were you? Susan slowly shook her head. No. We've been miserable for months. Grandma sighed. Because happiness built on dishonesty never lasts. Even the attorney quietly lowered his eyes. The private investigator closed his notebook. No one interrupted. Finally, Grandma spoke again. I've made my decision. Dad looked up hopefully. So, what happens now? Grandma smiled sadly. The house will remain exactly where your father and I intended. She handed another envelope to the attorney. I've updated my trust. The attorney opened it and nodded. It's official. Grandma turned toward me. Emma. I looked at her in surprise. Yes? I want you to become the future trustee of this home. My eyes filled with tears. Grandma, are you sure? She smiled warmly. I've watched you through all of this. You never asked for the house. You never asked for money. You only wanted the truth. I couldn't hold back my tears. I hugged her tightly. Thank you. She whispered. Promise me one thing. Anything. No matter what happens in your life, never let greed become more important than family. I promise. Dad quietly stood up. I don't deserve forgiveness. Grandma nodded gently. Not today. He looked confused. She continued. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once. It's something you earn through your actions. Those words stayed with all of us. Over the following months, my parents sold many of their own possessions to pay off their debts. They attended counseling. They worked to rebuild the trust they had destroyed. It wasn't easy. Some wounds take years to heal. Others never heal completely. Grandma continued living in the old farmhouse she loved so much. Every Sunday, she invited the family for dinner. Not because everything had been forgotten, but because she believed broken families only have a chance to heal if someone is willing to leave the door open. Years later, when Grandma peacefully passed away, the entire town attended her funeral. Neighbors spoke about her kindness. Friends remembered her wisdom. Even strangers described her as a woman who always did the right thing, even when it was difficult. As we stood beneath the old oak tree Grandpa had planted decades earlier, I finally understood what Grandma had been protecting all along. It had never been just a house. It was our family's history. Our memories. Our values. The walls weren't priceless because of their value on the market. They were priceless because they had been built with love, sacrifice, and honesty. Today, I still live in that farmhouse. Every morning, I sit on the same front porch where Grandma once drank her coffee. Sometimes I can almost hear her gentle voice saying, "A house is built with bricks. But a home is built with love." And every time I hear those words in my heart, I remember the greatest lesson she ever taught us. Money can buy almost anything. But it can never buy trust once it's been lost. If this story reminded you that honesty, family, and integrity are worth more than wealth, share it with someone you love. Sometimes, one story is all it takes to remind us what truly matters. The end.